Obrigado por sua hospitalidade. Organizou muito bem esta conferência em pouco tempo. É uma honra para mim estar aqui consigo, primeiro-ministro Durão Barroso, e com os nossos dois outros amigos, quando aqui nos dedicamos à paz e segurança no mundo. Tivemos uma ótima discussão, falarmos já muito por telefone.
We concluded that tomorrow is a moment of truth for the world. Many nations have voiced a commitment to peace and security, and now they must demonstrate that commitment to peace and security in the only effective way, by supporting the immediate and unconditional disarmament of Saddam Hussein. The dictator of Iraq and his weapons of mass destruction are a threat to the security of free nations. He is a danger to his neighbors. He's a sponsor of terrorism. He's an obstacle to progress in the Middle East. For decades, he has been a cruel oppressor of the Iraq people. On this very day, we must not permit his crimes to reach across the world. Saddam Hussein has a history of mass murder. He possesses the weapons of mass murder. He agreed to disarm Iraq of these weapons as a condition for ending the Gulf War over a decade ago. The United Nations Security Council in Resolution 1441 has declared Iraq in material breach of its long-standing obligations, demanded once again Iraq's full and immediate disarmament, and promised serious consequences if the regime refused to comply. That resolution was passed unanimously, and its logic is inescapable. The Iraqi regime will disarm itself, or the Iraqi regime will be disarmed by force. And the regime has not disarmed itself. Action to remove the threat from Iraq would also allow the Iraqi people to build a better future for their society. And Iraq's liberation would be the beginning, not the end, of our commitment to its people. We will supply humanitarian relief, bring the economic sanctions to a swift close, and work for the long-term recovery of Iraq's economy. We'll make sure that Iraq's natural resources are used for the benefit of their owners, the Iraqi people. Iraq has the potential to be a great nation. Iraq's people are skilled and educated. We'll push as quickly as possible for an Iraqi interim authority to draw upon the talents of Iraq's people to rebuild their nation. We're committed to the goal of a unified Iraq with democratic institutions in which members of all ethnic and religious groups are treated with dignity and respect. To achieve this vision, we will work closely with the international community, including the United Nations and our coalition partners. If military force is required, we'll quickly seek new Security Council resolutions to encourage broad participation in the process of helping the Iraqi people to build a free Iraq. Crucial days lie ahead for the world. I want to thank the leaders here today and many others for stepping forward and taking leadership and showing their resolve in the cause of peace and in the cause of security. Jose Maria.
The key point, which is our responsibility to uphold the will of the United Nations set out in Resolution 1441 last November. And for 4.5 months now, we have worked hard to get Saddam to cooperate fully, unconditionally, as that resolution demanded. Even some days ago, we were prepared to set out clear tests that allowed us to conclude whether he was cooperating fully or not, with a clear ultimatum to him if he refused to do so. And the reason we approached it in that way is that that is what we agreed in Resolution 1441. This was his final opportunity. He had to disarm unconditionally. Serious consequences would follow if he failed to do so. And this is really the impasse that we have. Because some say there should be no ultimatum, no authorization of force in any new UN resolution. Instead, more discussion in the event of non-compliance. But the truth is that without a credible ultimatum authorizing force in the event of non-compliance, then more discussion is just more delay. With Saddam remaining, armed with weapons of mass destruction, and continuing a brutal, murderous regime in Iraq. And this game that he is playing is frankly a game that he's played over the last 12 years. Disarmament never happens, but instead the international community is drawn into some perpetual negotiation. Gestures designed to divide the international community, but never real and concrete cooperation leading to disarmament. And there's not a single person on the Security Council that doubts the fact he is not fully cooperating today. Nobody, even those who disagree with the position that we have outlined, is prepared to say there is full cooperation as 1441 demanded. Not a single interview has taken place outside of Iraq, even though 1441 provided for it. Still, no proper production or evidence of the destruction of, for example, just to take one example, the 10,000 litres of anthrax that the inspectors just a week ago said was unaccounted for. And that is why it is so important that the international community at this time gives a strong and unified message. And I have to say that I really believe that hadn't we given that strong message some time ago, Saddam might have realized that the games had to stop. So now we have reached the point of decision. And we make a final appeal for there to be that strong, unified message on behalf of the international community that lays down a clear ultimatum to Saddam that authorizes force if he continues to defy the will of the whole of the international community set out in 1441. We will do all we can in the short time that remains to make a final round of contacts to see whether there is a way through this impasse. But we are in the final stages, because after 12 years of failing to disarm him, now is the time when we have to decide. Two other points briefly on the documents that we've put before you. The first, as the President Athman was just saying to you a moment or two ago on the transatlantic alliance, is, I think, very important. I mean, some of you will have heard me say this before, but let me just repeat it. I believe that Europe and America should stand together on the big issues of the day. I think it is a tragedy when we don't. And that transatlantic alliance is strong, and we need to strengthen it still further. And secondly, we've set out for you that should it come to conflict, we make a pledge to the people of Iraq. And as President Bush was just saying to you a moment or two ago, it is the people of Iraq who are the primary victims of Saddam. The thousands of children that die needlessly every year, the people locked up in his prisons or executed simply for showing disagreement with the regime, a country that is potentially prosperous, reduced to poverty, 60% of the population reliant on food aid. And what we say is that we will protect Iraq's territorial integrity, we will support representative government that unites Iraq on the democratic basis of human rights and the rule of law, that we will help Iraq rebuild, and not rebuild because of the problems of conflict, where if it comes to that, we will do everything we can to minimize the suffering of the Iraqi people, but rebuild Iraq because of the appalling legacy that the rule of Saddam has left the Iraqi people. And then in particular, Iraq's natural resources remain the property of the people of Iraq. And that wealth should be used for the Iraqi people. It is theirs and will remain so, administered by the UN in the way we set out. And finally, on the Middle East.
Tomorrow is the day that we will determine whether or not diplomacy can work. And we sat and visited about this issue, about how best to spend our time between now and tomorrow. And as Prime Minister Blair said, we'll be working the phones and talking to our partners and talking to those who may not clearly understand the objective. And we'll see how it goes tomorrow. Saddam Hussein can leave the country if he's interested in peace. You see, the decision is his to make, and it's been his to make all along as to whether or not there's the use of the military. He got to decide whether he's going to disarm, and he didn't. He can decide whether he wants to leave the country. These are his decisions to make, and thus far he has made bad decisions. Unanimously approved that said Saddam Hussein would unconditionally disarm, and if he didn't, there would be serious consequences. The United Nations Security Council looked at the issue 4.5 months ago and voted unanimously to say, disarm immediately and unconditionally. And if you don't, there are going to be serious consequences. The world has spoken, and it did in a unified voice. Sorry.
The issue is very simply this, that we cannot have a situation where what happens through the United Nations, having agreed 1441, having said there will be serious consequences if he doesn't cooperate fully and unconditionally, what we cannot have is a situation where we simply go back for endless discussion. Now, we have provided the right diplomatic way through this, which is to lay down a clear ultimatum to Saddam: cooperate or face disarmament by force. And it's entirely within the logic, the letter, the spirit of 1441. And that is why, all the way through we have tried to provide a diplomatic solution. After over 4.5 months since we passed Resolution 1441, we're now, 3 months on from the declaration that Saddam made on the 8th of December, that not a single person in the international community, not one, believes was an honest declaration of what he had. And yet 1441 said the first step of cooperation was to make an honest declaration. So when people say, have we exhausted all the diplomatic avenues? We've tried exhausting them. But understand from our perspective and from the perspective of the security of the world, we cannot simply go back to the Security Council for this discussion to be superseded by that discussion, to be superseded by another discussion. That's what's happened for 12 years. That's why he's still got the weapons of mass destruction. We have to come to the point of decision.